Greetings, scholars, my name's Wormwood and welcome to the first episode in my new series, Classical Chinese for Beginners. I maintain that all you really need to learn Classical Chinese is a grammar, a dictionary, and a classical text to work on. That said, it does of course help to have a teacher, or for lack of a teacher, a YouTuber with delusions of grandeur, on hand to help you on your way. Yet, we must learn to crawl ere we may hope to run, and so throughout this Absolute Beginner series, I will be using traditional classical Chinese children's literature, such as the 3-character classic, the 弟子规, the 1000-character classic, and the Jade Forest of Children's Learning as the basis of these lessons. Even if you, gentle viewer, only want to learn a bit of classical Chinese, to improve your modern Chinese or to flex on the peasantry, both very noble goals in their own right, these should serve you quite well. And once we're done with the kiddie stuff, we can go on to tackle the actual classics. But for now, let's have a look at our very first text, the 三字经, aka the 3-character classic. It was written during the Song Dynasty, and for centuries it was the primary education text used to teach children how to read and write. The text itself is around 1200 characters long, arranged in lines of 3 characters, given the text its name, and further into rhyming verses of 6. This short and sweet arrangement will allow you to learn many common characters as well as common classical Chinese grammar structures, along with elements of Chinese history and the basics of Confucian morality, especially filial piety and respecting your elders and betters. Due to the extremely concise format, however, many of these concepts are presented like bullet points without much explanation at all. This is a feature, not a bug. For this reason, apart from going through vocabulary and grammar, I will also be providing additional cultural and historical context throughout each video via quote-unquote nerd notes. To avoid going on any half-hour tangents, any longer commentaries will be confined to its own section at the very end. Naturally, we won't be going through the entire text in one go, but rather I'll be chopping it up into bite-sized chunks for you. As we progress, I will gradually increase the size of these chunks to avoid this becoming a 100+ episode series. Hashtag bad at content creating. Oh, and one more thing before we start. While it is my firm belief that you do not need to know Mandarin Chinese, or any modern Chinese language for that matter, to master classical Chinese, it is nonetheless conducive to the learning process to have some sort of sound associated with the character and meanings thereof. Classical Chinese is an exclusively written language. In ages past, text would be read aloud in the speaker's own native language, be that Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Vietnamese, or what have you. Since yours truly is a fairly decent Mandarin speaker, and most classical Chinese dictionaries available in English use the Mandarin readings, this is what I will be using throughout these videos. All of you are of course free to read along in the language of your choice. Heck, you can even read classical Chinese in plain English. To that end, apart from the Mandarin Zhuyin and Pinyin readings, I'll also provide Japanese, Korean, and Vietnamese readings along with the relevant meanings in English. I would have added readings for other Chinese languages in the spirit of fairness, but sadly they made the videos incomprehensibly cluttered, so I hope you will forgive this necessary compromise. We all on the same page? Good, let's begin. 人之初，性本善，性相近，习相远。狗不教，性乃迁。教之道，贵以专。人之初，性本善，性相近，习相远。狗不教，性乃迁。教之道，贵以专。人 Man, human being, people. A pictogram of a human in profile. Note that classical Chinese, just like modern Chinese, doesn't consistently mark plurals the way English does. So whether 人 is to be translated as person or people depends on context. 之 A grammatic particle marking possession. The character shows a foot, 指, over a straight line, and originally meant to walk. Presumably because even 3,000 years ago, cops would pull you over and make you walk in a straight line just to see how drunk you were. We'll go over this character more thoroughly in the grammar section. 初 Start, beginning. The character shows a knife, 刀, and a piece of clothing, 衣. When making clothes, you start by cutting the cloth. 性, one's inborn nature or predisposition. The character is composed of 心, heart. The ancient Chinese believed that one's soul resided in the heart, and the character 生, life, to give birth. The heart you are born with, that is, your inborn nature, 生, is also phonetic. 本, originally, fundamentally. The character shows a tree with the root indicated by a horizontal stroke. The basic meaning of this character is, unsurprisingly, root, but in the text it is used as an adverb, originally, initially, fundamentally. More on that in the grammar section. 善, good, excellent, benevolent. The character is composed of the character for sheep, 羊, and the character for speech, 言. The two characters sorta smoosh together. 言 here acts as a phonetic. The humble sheep was considered an auspicious animal in ancient China, which is why it is included in many characters with a positive connotation. 相, each other, one another. The character shows a tree, 木, and an eye, also 木, and originally meant to look at something very, very closely, and in the cutthroat imperial court, you better believe that everyone was watching each other pretty closely. 近, near, close, but also come close, draw near. More on that in the grammar section. The character is composed of the so-called road radical, 绰, plus 金, axe, which is here used phonetically. If you need to ask someone a question, you first need to get nice and close. 习, practice, rehearse, as well as habit. Composed of 雨, feathers, and 日, the sun, day, every day. Later, the sun was confused with the character 百, which is why 习 comes with an extra dot. A young bird flapping its wings every day, practicing how to fly. And if you practice something every day, eventually it becomes a habit. 远, far, distant, as well as to separate or to distance oneself from. Composed of the road radical 绰, with yuan, a family name, as a phonetic component. Nerd note! The phonetic element in yuan is very likely the original form of this character, which is why it has an extra foot on top of the robe, signifying distance. The circle in the middle of the character is the primitive form of the character yuan, round, circle, and is the original phonetic element. But I hear you ask, what about the clothes radical? What does that have to do with anything? Well, have you seen a Chinese robe before? Those things go on for miles. 狗, if, supposing. From 草, grass, over 锯, hook, which is phonetic. Originally, this character was the name of a plant. It was borrowed phonetically for the homophone 狗, meaning if. 不, 不, a grammatic particle used to negate verbs. The character is a pictogram showing the calyx of a flower, and for those of you who didn't major in botany, the calyx is the thing covering a flower before it blooms, and afterwards supporting the flower from underneath. The character was borrowed phonetically for the negative particle. More on that in the grammar section. Nerd note! In Mandarin Chinese, this character has two readings depending on if the following character has a fourth tone, that is the falling tone, or not. If the next character has a falling tone, 不 will instead be read as 不, that is in the second or rising tone. In other words, not teach is read as 不教 and not 不教. And speaking of teaching, 教. To teach, to instruct, also teaching and education. The character depicts a hand holding a teaching cane, 扑, plus 子, child, and 爻, divination. To teach a child divination from the I Jing. Yao is also phonetic. 乃, then, only then. The exact origin of this character is unknown, but it possibly shows a picture of a rope. The original meaning has long since been lost to time, and 乃 was phonetically borrowed for the meaning then, only then. 迁, to change, to transform. Another character with the 绰, road radical, plus 迁, which means to ascend, used phonetically. Nerd note! Like yuan before it, the phonetic element in 迁 is most likely the earlier form. In the bronze inscription, this character is used specifically to describe moving the capital from one place to another. This early character is a complex logogram showing two pairs of hands lifting an object with the so-called city-state radical E to one side. Literally packing your bags and moving the seat of government. As the meaning expanded from to move the capital to move in general, then further into to change, to shift, to transform, the character also became more stylized, and so it was expanded with the now familiar road radical in order to make the meaning more obvious, while the original glyph was reinterpreted as a not so simple phonetic element. Tao. The way, the Tao. Once again, we see the road radical chuo plus shou, head, which represents a person. Someone walking on a path, thus the original meaning was road. The original meaning gradually became more abstract, which is why we most often see it used in the sense of the Tao or the way.
This is the way.
This is the way. This is the way.
As in, the correct way of doing something. Gui. Costly, expensive, dear, valuable, precious. This character shows two hands facing downward, plus tu, land, and bei, cash. The original meaning was to bequeath, that is, to leave behind after your death. Now, usually that stuff fetches a pretty good price, which is why everyone always starts family feuding after grandma kicks the bucket. Thus, the meaning gradually shifted from to bequeath, to leave behind, now written with a different character, to instead mean expensive, dear, costly, etc. To use, to take, to regard as. A pictogram showing a man taking or using an object. In the text, it's used as a coverb. More on that in the grammar section. Zhuan. Focused, concentrated, exclusively, specially. The character shows a hand, cun, winding silk onto a spool. A task which requires focus and concentration. And now, on to the grammar section. Let's get the basic stuff out of the way before going into specifics, shall we? Classical Chinese is the written form of Old Chinese, or Chinese as it was spoken between 500 and 200 BC. This stage of Chinese, unlike modern Mandarin, was primarily monosyllabic, with some exceptions, meaning that by and large, a Chinese character represents one syllable, which represents one independent word. Apart from being monosyllabic, Classical Chinese is also uninflected. That is, a word in Classical Chinese does not change depending on case, tense, person, number, voice, or mood. Being both monosyllabic and uninflected has had a few interesting effects on Classical Chinese. For starters, words in Classical Chinese can quite easily slip between word classes. The same word can act as a noun, an adjective, a verb, or an adverb depending on its position in a sentence. Secondly, word order in Classical Chinese is muy importante.
Muy importante!
And is often the only way you can tell how one word relates to another within a sentence. Like English, Classical Chinese follows an SVO, that is, subject, verb, object, word order. But unlike English, this word order is much stricter, with only a few very specific exceptions which we'll encounter later on. Lastly, as you may have noticed already, Classical Chinese is a very terse and pithy language. Treebeard would have hated it.
Don't be hasty.
Using only precious few words, but by golly they make those words count. To illustrate, with the characters we've already gone over in the vocab section, we can construct a very simple example sentence. 人, 金, 木. Literally, man, axe, wood. To start off, by applying the SVO word order, 人, man, is the subject, i.e. the one doing something, 木, wood, is the object, the thing being acted on. Now, 金 would normally mean axe, that is the tool, but with the context we have from the rest of the sentence, the most logical interpretation becomes that it is in fact used as a verb, that is, to cut. Thus, from the limited information we get from this sentence, we can interpret its meaning as something along the lines of a man cuts wood. Nerd note! Strictly speaking, not every character can jump word classes like this, and in the beginning you'll be checking your classical Chinese dictionary a lot. If we check the dictionary, we'll see that jin can indeed mean both axe and to cut, thus interpreting it as a verb in this instance would not be inaccurate. Whether the word can be used in several roles or not can be traced back to its use in Old Chinese, but ultimately it comes down to tradition. To put it simply, if a word has never been used as a noun, it won't be used as a noun, and if a word has never been used as a verb, then we can't interpret it as a verb. Another common sentence structure is the topic-comment formula, where the first half of the sentence is the topic, the thing we're talking about, to which some sort of change or comment is then attached. When translated into English, this type of sentence is often rendered as with regard to X, it is Y. And while that may not make for the most eloquent of translations, thinking like this may help you understand the sentence more readily in the beginning. Without getting into the specifics, let's illustrate the topic-comment structure with the line 人之初性本善, literally man, possessive, beginning, nature, originally good. Here, 人之初, man, possessive, beginning, is the topic, and 性本善, nature, originally good, is the comment upon that topic. And I think that's quite enough of the general rules of classical Chinese to give y'all a lasting headache. So let's have a look at those specifics, shall we? The possessive particle, 之. In classical Chinese, the character 之 has 3 uses. Originally, it was a verb, which meant to go. However, this meaning is mostly confined to very archaic Chinese. Secondly, as the third-person pronoun, when used as the object of a verb, equivalent to English him, her, it, or them. And thirdly, as the possessive particle. The third use is by far the most common and remains in use to this day. Used in this way, 之 fills the same function as modern Mandarin 的 or Japanese の. In English, we can choose between using possessive s or of to translate 之. The noun that comes before this particle is always the quote-unquote owner of the noun that comes after the particle. On the screen, you can see the basic pattern for using 之. So, A 之 B can be translated as either A's B or the B of A. And though our vocabulary at this time is fairly limited, you'll see that we can already make a few example sentences along this pattern. 木之本, tree, possessive, root. A tree's root or the root of a tree. 人之性, man, possessive, nature. Not to be confused with your toxic ex. Man's inborn nature or the inborn nature of humanity, etc. 羊之目, sheep, possessive, eye, which we can translate as the sheep's eye, the sheep's eyes, or the eyes of sheep. In English and many other languages, we have a class of words known as adjectives. Adjectives are words that describe the quality of a noun, like tall, short, thick, thin, good, and evil. However, in classical Chinese, these words should more accurately be considered a subcategory of verbs known as stative verbs. They behave pretty much like verbs, and the line between a stative verb and a regular verb can be quite blurry at times. Yet they are stative because most of the time they do not move like regular verbs do. So far, we've encountered 5 stative verbs. 善, good, 近, near, 远, far, 贵, dear, and 转, concentrated. If we place the stative verb before a noun, it acts more or less like an English adjective. So 善人 would be read as good people or a good person, 贵人, a person of high rank, that is a dear person, 远道, far road, would be a far away or distant road, etc. If we place a stative verb after a noun, on the other hand, it will act more like a classical verb and forms a complete sentence. In English, you must use the verb to be if you want to say that the man is good, but in classical Chinese, all you need to do is simply write 人善, man good. Let's see another example, paraphrased from our main text. 人之性近, literally man, possessive, nature, and close, which we can understand as people's nature are close, or the inborn nature of people are close. Adverbs are words that modify verbs. In English, we might say the boy runs quickly. Here, quickly is an adverb that modifies the verb to run. Today, we've encountered two adverbs, 本 originally and 相 each other. However, while an adverb in English can come either before or after the verb it modifies, the boy can either run quickly or quickly run. In classical Chinese, the adverb must always come before the verb. Remember that adjectives in classical Chinese are also a type of verb, so adverbs can also modify stative verbs. Now let's see some examples. 羊本善, literally sheep, originally good. Here, the adverb 本 originally modifies the stative verb 善 to be good. Thus, we can interpret this sentence as sheep are originally good. Example the second. 人相习, literally man, each other, learn. Here, 相 mutually each other modifies the verb 习 to learn, to train, to practice. Nerd note! One cool detail is because 相 by definition has to indicate two or more of something. 人, man or person, must be understood as being in the plural, men or people, despite the fact that classical Chinese doesn't actually mark plurals. Just like in modern Mandarin, the word 不 is used to negate verbs, as well as stative verbs. Also like in modern Mandarin, when negating a verb, you place 不 in front of that verb, like so. Thus, 教 means to teach, and 不教 means to not teach. 迁 means to change, so 不迁 means to not change or unchanging. 善 means good, so 不善 means not good or evil. 远 means far, and so 不远 becomes not far or close, etc., etc. Individually, both 狗 and 奶 have their own special meanings and functions. As far as this lesson is concerned, it is enough that you know that they can be used together, like in our sample text, in order to express a hypothetical. If A, then B. Let's have a look at how this construction is used in the main text. 狗不教 性乃迁, literally, if not teach, nature, then change. Here, 不教 is the topic, while 狗 marks it as a hypothetical, if. Thus, if one does not teach. Here referring back to man or mankind, so if man is not taught what is right or wrong, how to behave, etc. 性乃迁 is the comment, the result of the hypothetical lack of education, which is that the 性 nature of the untaught individual will 迁 change, presumably for the worse. 乃 then is used to emphasize the contrast between the topic and the comment. Nerd note! In this instance, 乃 appears between 性 and 迁. This is because of something called fronting. This means that 性 has been put in the front of the comment half of the sentence for the sake of emphasis. If we rearrange the sentence to place 乃 at the front of the comment half, we would get 狗不教 乃性迁. Broadly speaking, the meaning doesn't change. However, the weight or the focus of the sentence shifts from 性 nature to the particle 乃 then. The difference lies in what is presented as the most important information. The basic meaning of the character yi is as the verb to use, equivalent to modern Mandarin 用. Apart from its use as a regular old verb, and the focus of this section is its use as a so-called co-verb. Now, we've learned about verbs, stative verbs, and adverbs, so what in the Jade Emperor's name is a co-verb? Put simply, a co-verb is a word that acts both as a verb and as an English preposition, that is, words like off, to, in, for, at, on, etc. Thus, the function of a co-verb is to indicate in what manner, with what means, on whose behalf, for what purpose, etc., that an action is taken. Now, this is all very theoretical. Hopefully, having a look at an example or two will make things a little bit clearer. 以金金木善, 以手金木不善. Literally, use axe cut wood, good. Use head cut wood, not good. Keep in mind that while you can read yi here as the verb to use, that is, to use an axe to cut wood, good, to use head to cut wood is not good. It is better, and makes for better translations into English, to understand yi as the preposition with. To wit, cutting wood with an axe is good, cutting wood with your head is not good, no matter how sharp you think you are. Admittedly, a very silly sentence, but one that I feel illustrates the use of yi fairly well with the vocabulary we have at our disposal. Let's take a look at how it is used in the main text. 教之道, 贵以专. The topic here is 教之道, the Tao of education, or the correct way of teaching, and the comment is 贵以专. Let's unpack the second half, shall we? 贵 means dear, valuable, or important, here acting as a verb to consider important or to consider valuable. 贵 is also fronted for emphasis. 专 is a stative verb to be concentrated. This leaves us with yi in the middle, which, because it precedes the stative verb 专, must be a coverb. Now, because coverbs indicate in what manner, with what means, on whose behalf, for what purpose, etc. an action is being performed, the aforementioned Tao of education is to be carried out by means of considering concentration or focus as being the most important. Or, in other words, the correct way to teach is to put the utmost importance in concentration or complete focus. And this concludes your grammar section for this video. On to the commentary. Why does the 三字经 begin with the words 人之初性本善 anyways? Because if reading classical Chinese literature for years has taught me anything, it is that ancient authors were extremely OCD about literary composition. It should come as no small surprise that the TCC is a Confucian text. And while Confucius was never explicit about whether he thought human nature was fundamentally good or not, only that they were quote-unquote alike, the whole 心想近习想远 bit is actually a near direct quote from the Analects. This, however, didn't stop his later followers from fiercely debating the topic of whether mankind is fundamentally good or evil for centuries. For those of you in my audience familiar with Western philosophy, you can compare this debate to that between Rousseau and Hobbes. At the time, two other major Chinese philosophical schools, Taoism and legalism, had already made up their minds on the nature of mankind. The Taoists, in general, believed that human nature was fundamentally good and instead blamed society for making people wicked and selfish, which is why they often rejected both society and such newfangled concepts like agriculture to live as hermits in the mountains. The legalists, on the other hand, thought that the Taoists were a bunch of layabout hippies who should shave their beards and get a real job. They also believed that humanity as a whole are wicked, selfish, amoral creatures who could only be made to benefit society via strict laws and stricter punishments. Since no school of thought exists in a vacuum, Confucian thinkers were influenced by these rival philosophies, resulting in two main camps within Confucianism. The scholar Xunzi sided with the legalists and agreed that mankind was born flawed and selfish, while the philosopher Mengzi was more influenced by the Taoist view and thought that humanity was born good, what he referred to as the sprout of goodness. Of course, despite the influence from other schools, Xunzi and Mengzi were still very much Confucians, which meant that they both agreed that rituals and moral education were super duper important. What they disagreed on was why it was important. Xunzi believed that moral education and rituals were necessary to curb mankind's innate selfishness and eliminate vices, or else mankind would live and act like animals, or even worse, like foreigners. Meanwhile, Mengzi believed that his so-called sprout of goodness needed proper moral guidance and education in order to grow big and strong. Mengzi and Xunzi both had their own loyal fan clubs, who kept the debate going for well after these two gentlemen had passed away. Come the Song Dynasty, and Confucianism was having a midlife crisis and rebranded itself as Neo-Confucianism. In the same stroke, by imperial decree, Mengzi was elevated to the position of super-duper important philosopher guy, second only to the big man Master Kong himself. This earned Mengzi the nickname Ya Sheng, meaning the second sage, It also meant that the debate on human nature was settled, because Mengzi was incorporated into the Great Confucian canon, while Xunzi was relegated to the footnotes of history. And that, dear children, is the reason why we celebrate Easter. Wait, no, I mean the reason why the TCC begins with the words 人之初性本善. That was a lot just for 2 rows of 24 characters in total. But that's the beauty of classical Chinese, you make those 24 characters count, damn it. And here you have today's main text in full once again. In ages past, teachers would make students write each character by hand a minimum of 50 times. However, I don't feel like paying for y'all's carpal tunnel surgeries, so instead what I want you to do is use what you've learned today and try and make your own translations in the comments below. If you're so inclined, you can just find one of the many translations of the TCC online and copy-paste it into the comments, but I can tell if you did and I will judge you for it. Since classical Chinese is a text-only language, the single best way to practice and improve is to engage with the text itself as much as possible. So if you just copy-paste someone else's translation and call it a day, you'll improve about as fast as your weeb friend learning Japanese by watching English-subbed anime. 千里之行，始于足下. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. Today, you've all taken your first step into a greater world. Remember to like and subscribe, join the Chinese Merchant Guild by supporting me on Patreon, and stay tuned for more classical Chinese videos. Until next time, scholars.